Let me get myself set up here. And if you guys would, when I hit play, if I could get a thumbs up that you could hear it, just to make sure it comes out on your end. So there's you. And then here's our video.
Home Measurement Fundamentals is brought to you by the Winston-Salem Regional Association of Realtors and Piedmont Federal Savings Bank. Any discussion of a home starts with two fundamental questions. The first, of course, is, where is it? That question is always closely followed by, how large is it? As you probably know, that's a really important question, and it's the subject of this video series. There are 5 videos overall, with this video tackling the details of what space or square footage should be included. The remaining 4 videos show you how to apply what you will learn in this video to homes of varied construction and architectural styles. There are a number of fundamentals that will impact your work in measuring any home regardless of its style. Let's get started. The valuation of a residential property is directly impacted by the size of the house. Potential homeowners make decisions based on the sizes of homes they are considering. An inaccurate home measurement can lead to a valuation that is wrong, and to incorrect decisions being made by potential homeowners who rely on those measurements. No one wants that, of course. Calculating the accurate size of a home requires a disciplined and technical process. The size or portion of a home that matters most is its living area. This is sometimes called heated living area or heated square footage. A clear understanding of what is and is not included within the living area of a home is critical. The living area of a home is the space that will be occupied by the homeowner. As you've probably guessed, the living area does not include all of the space that is under the roof of the home. First off, the living area must be heated with a permanently installed heating system that makes the space suitable for living year-round. Neither a portable heater nor a fireplace is considered permanent heating sources. In addition, the living area must be finished with walls painted and floors covered. The living area must also have a ceiling height of at least 7 feet, except under beams and ducts where the ceiling height must be at least 6 feet 4 inches. When a room has sloped ceilings, such as those often found in bonus rooms and finished attic spaces, the area of a room with a ceiling height of at least 5 feet can be included in the living area of the home, so long as at least half of the room's square footage has a ceiling height of at least 7 feet. The living area must also be directly accessible from other living areas via a doorway, heated hallway, or stairway. If a space within the home is heated, finished, and directly accessible from other living areas, it counts as a living area, and its square footage is included. Questions sometimes arise regarding whether to include a number of special areas and architectural spaces within the living space of the home. Let's run through a number of those now. Assuming that these spaces meet the criteria of heated, finished, and directly accessible from other living areas, then the following spaces can be included within the living area of the home. Attics. Again, if they meet the living area criteria, then they do count. But keep in mind the ceiling height requirements we mentioned earlier. Also, be sure to note that this space is in the attic in the listing notes for the home. Many attics will not meet the living area requirements, but some will. Basements. Remember that the space must be finished, and again, keep the ceiling height requirements in mind, as well as the need to be directly accessible from other living areas of the home. If the basement is included in living space, make note that the space is below grade or is a basement space. Bay window areas. If the space has a finished floor and ceiling height of at least 7 feet, it counts as living area. Bonus rooms, also called finished rooms over the garage, they count. Just keep the ceiling height requirements in mind. Chimney. The space for the chimney base counts as living area if it is located inside the living area. If the chimney base is outside of the living area, then it does not count. If the hearth is included inside the living area, then include the space for the hearth. Stairs. If the stairs connect living area spaces, include the area of the stairs with the area of the floor from which the stairs descend. If the opening for the stairway exceeds the length and width of the stairway, subtract the excess space from the upper floor and include it with the lower floor, regardless of the ceiling height under the stairs. Furnace and mechanical rooms. For simplicity, if these spaces are located within the living area of the home, they are included even if the living area criteria are not met. Hallways, closets, dormers, offices, storage rooms, and laundry rooms, they're all included if they meet the living area criteria. Spaces within the home that do not meet the living area criteria should not be included within the square footage of the living area, but should be mentioned in the listing data for the home. These would include areas such as unfinished basements, unfinished attics, and unfinished bonus rooms. Decks, balconies, porches, garages, and carports should not be included in finished or unfinished area calculations for the home, but are noted for information purposes. At this point, you have a good idea of what should and should not be included in the living area of the home. Let's take a look at the tools you will use. You will need a few things to complete a home measurement project, including a 100-foot tape measure, a 30-foot retractable tape measure, some graph paper. 10 square graph paper is best where 10 by 10 squares equal an inch, a camera, you can use the one on your phone of course, and a clipboard. A laser distance meter is also helpful and can speed up the process, especially with interior measurements. Homes are measured in feet and tenths of a foot rather than feet and inches, so it is best to get a 100-foot tape with increments in tenths of a foot. Or you can simply convert your measurements into tenths of a foot using conversion tables which can be found online. You may also want to have a screwdriver with you. More on that in a later video. There are apps and software that can be used to aid the measurement process, and many of them are quite good. For our purposes here, we will be demonstrating the measurement and calculation of home spaces without apps or software. If you know how to do the work without those aids, you will be much more proficient if you choose to incorporate those apps into your process. Either way, you'll be doing the measurements manually and thinking through what areas count as living area and what areas do not. In the next video in the Home Measurement Fundamentals series, we'll take what we have learned and use it to measure a ranch-style home with a basement. We'll pay particular attention to the overall process used to correctly measure a home. Later videos in this series will demonstrate the measurement of split-level, 1 and 1.5 story, and 2-story homes. We encourage you to watch all 5 of the videos in the Home Measurement Fundamentals series to develop a full understanding of the process used for accurate results. Home Measurement Fundamentals is brought to you by the Winston-Salem Regional Association of Realtors and Piedmont Federal Savings Bank. Live local, bank local.
Okay, so what I want to do, a couple things real quick. Right now in the chat, I am putting the link to the video you guys just watched. So if you want to grab it, to save it to watch it later, you guys should have that link. Yes. Okay. So you click on it, copy, paste it, whichever. The video did indicate that there are some other series. It's a series, a 5-part series, and it breaks down the different styles. So you're welcome to watch 2, 3, 4, and 5. But just let's keep our focus on the test, right? So we're introducing you to the idea of measuring. You'll get more specifics, more into detail when you get into post-licensing and obviously when you get out. Once again, I just want to make sure everybody has, what do we say? Yeah, 744 and 745 of your book are the couple pages in the Appendix C to pay attention to get ready for your test. Couple things I want to mention that was discussed in the video. We talked last night about when you measure, you start outside and you measure outside everything under the roof, and then you go inside and deduct what doesn't count. Like, for example, the garage. One thing we need to get some clarification on, you may have a situation where you can't get to the outside to measure it. So let's say, for example, you have a home that's a 2-story. You can measure the first story, but if the second story is bigger, obviously you're not going to be able to measure that second story without trying to hurt yourself on a ladder, right? So I don't want anybody trying to climb a ladder to measure a house. So when you run into a situation, maybe the side of it, maybe it's a basement and it touches earth and you can't get into it to measure. So if you ever run into a situation where you cannot measure outside, then you always go inside and measure the exterior walls. So you measure inside. By exterior wall, I mean on the other side of that wall is the outside. Compare that to an interior wall, where on the other side of that wall is another room or a hallway or a closet or something. So exterior, interior walls, it's what's on the other side. So you go upstairs, you measure outside on the first floor. In this case, you measure outside on the first floor, and then you go upstairs and you measure inside, and then you add 6 inches. And that 6 inches accounts for the width of the walls, and that'll get you that accurate measurement. So again, if you ever can't safely get to the outside, go inside and measure exterior walls and add 6 inches. The exception to that is going to be condos. Condo owners don't own outside. So condos, you always measure inside, and you don't need to add 6 inches. You just measure on the inside. Questions do we have on measuring?
Sorry, quick question on that.
Sure.
If you're measuring the inside perimeter, you say you add 6 inches for the outside wall.
The whole
Is
wall.
that 6 inches per wall? So
Yes.
you're assuming a 6-inch stud? So you're adding 12 total.
You're owed 6 inches to, I don't have my picture anymore, but yeah, you would measure each exterior wall and then add 6 inches to that exterior, all those exterior wall measurements. Because you're accounting for studs and sheetrock and vinyl
But it's
siding,
6
right? The
inches
whole,
per side, not 3 inches per side. So you're not adding 6 to the total, you're adding 6 per wall.
correct, 6 inches, yep. Okay. Again, you guys, when it comes to measuring, you're going to find out once you get into it, you're going to develop a preference. Some agents, I'm telling you, some agents are not comfortable with their mathematic abilities. Some agents are not comfortable without their measuring. They choose to hire somebody to measure it for them. Remember, you're always responsible for that measurement. So when you hire somebody with more experience than you, hire somebody that knows what they're doing, because you're ultimately responsible for those calculations. If you're comfortable doing it, once you do it a few times, you may find that you may be able to save yourself some money. I'm honest, of all the agents that I know, I literally could divide them 50-50. Some measure their own, some hire somebody. So it's just a preference thing and what you come down to, what you decide works best for you. It can take some time. The first house I measured, I didn't think I was ever gonna get done. The second house was a little better. The third house was a little better, right? Each one you get gets a little better each time. When you affiliate with your firms, your BIC may know of an experienced agent that's going to go out and measure a listing, and they may send you to go shadow them, to go watch them, to go observe. Hopefully, when you get your new listing, your first listing, they may send somebody with you to observe you and watch you. So it's one thing I don't want us to ever get concerned about. As long as you affiliate with the right firm that offers training and support, and especially, let's almost call it a mentorship for new agents, then you're going to be guided. You're going to have somebody with you side by side. So let's worry about getting our license first, and then we'll worry about whether or not we're going to measure our own listings or not. Fair enough? All right. So we're talking about working with the sellers, and we're talking about doing the things that we need to do with the sellers. So we went over our listing agreement last night. We've talked about determining square footage. Another important thing that we need to determine when working with sellers is, what's the appropriate listing price? How much are we going to list the home for? And to help the sellers determine that, we're going to perform something called a comparative market analysis, also known as a CMA. A CMA is studying homes that recently sold nearby. By studying the market and knowing what has recently closed, it'll help us learn. We know what a buyer was willing to pay for the home next door, so that'll help us arrive at an appropriate listing price for this property. CMAs, what we do with a CMA is what an appraiser does with an appraisal. It's not the same thing. It's a different process. I'm not a certified appraiser. I'm not allowed to say words like value. I can't look at a seller and say, I think the value of your home is X amount. That's me acting as an appraiser. What I can do is a CMA and look at the seller and say, I think your probable sales price is X amount. So again, it's about the wording. It's about how we word things. And then obviously, once we know the probable sales price, then from then we can determine the listing price. Do we need to adjust it up to allow wiggle room for negotiations? Was it last year when homes were flying off the shelf and prices really didn't matter? So it just depends on the market, the situation. We're going to talk a whole lot more about CMAs when we get to Unit 17. That's our appraisers unit. And we're going to talk about what we do with the CMA versus what the appraiser does for the appraisal. By the way, our CMAs usually can be generated from MLS. So another good point of that, plenty of training involved, clickety click and poof, there's a CMA. So we can generate those reports from there. As we said last night, I can't ask the seller to sign a listing agreement until I have it complete anyway. But particularly, we have to be on the same page. We have to decide on the list price before the seller can sign. I can't say something like to be determined later or about X amount. We need an exact listing price determined before we can ask everybody to sign. There's other things that we can study too to help properly the seller determine list price and market days and all that. You'll learn about those. Like, for example, we're going to be able to study the average days on market for the homes nearby, recently closed nearby. Days on market is how long it was active before it goes under contract. So by knowing what the average days on market is in this area, it'll help us determine like how long do we have the listing agreement for. If you find out your average days on market is 4 months and the seller wants to do a listing agreement for 3 months, average days on market says that doesn't give you enough time to sell it, right? So we can use that to help us determine days, use our CMAs to help us determine prices. There's several different things that we use to help properly fill in the blanks of these listing agreements instead of just throwing dates and numbers out there. As the listing agent, still working with the sellers, as the listing agent, You may at some point get the opportunity to list your own home. You get to wear two hats in that transaction. You're going to act as the seller and you're going to act as the listing agent. I get asked all the time, can I be my own listing agent? Well, yeah, I'm not paying somebody else to list my own home. I'm going to pay me to list my own home, right? So I can wear two hats. We always have a duty to avoid a conflict of interest. And covered under that duty, I cannot represent the buyer in the transaction when my name is on the deed. Boy, doesn't that make sense? I cannot represent the buyer in that transaction. What does Old Car say? Has my client's best interest. But let's face it, if my name's on the deed, whose best interest do I actually have? Julie's all day long, right? Do we see the conflict of interest here? Now, somebody else in my firm could represent the buyer, but I personally can't. Major conflict of interest. All good rules have an exception. To the exception to this one, if it's a commercial listing, and you own less than 25%. So you own a commercial listing, but your ownership interest is less than 25%. You may be able to represent the buyer in that transaction as long as you go into it with full disclosure. Let them know going into it, your name's on the deed, you have a 20% interest. Are you comfortable with this? If so, we'll proceed. If not, we got to find somebody else to work with you, somebody else to represent. Most good things come to an end. That does include our listing agreements. Now, we saw this very list in Unit 7. We see it again in Unit 8 as a discussion of working with the sellers, particularly our listing agreements. So what are the various ways those listing agreements can end? Well, when I get you to closing, I've done the job that I've been hired to do. We don't continue duties once I've completed the job. So if we went to closing today, if today was closing day, and our agency agreement didn't expire until the end of February, we're going to be done today because my job's done. You hired me to convey the title. You handled your title over. Closing will end our agency agreement. We know that all of our agency agreements must have a definite end date. They have to have an expiration date. And when they're over, they're over. We can agree to extend it, but if we don't, at 11:59 p.m. on our expiration date, our relationship is over. Mutual agreements of the parties. The parties agree to enter into the contract together, so the parties can agree to get out of. They can mutually agree. Always remember, not your listing. Whose listing is it? The firm's. So your BIC would have to release that. Your BIC would have to mutually agree to release that. You don't have that kind of power. Breach by either party. We saw briefly last night that the firm had duties to the seller has duties to the firm. If either one violates their duties, that's breach, and that could terminate the listing agreement. Operation of law. If the judge takes the property from the seller, maybe it's a bankruptcy or a foreclosure or an adverse possession. If the judge takes the property for any reason, it's no longer the seller's to sell. That would terminate our agency agreement. Destruction of the property. If the house burns down, I no longer have that house to sell. Or death or incapacity of either party. Remember, the relationship is between the client and the firm. So if the individual agent dies, or if the individual agent's license goes inactive, the show goes on. In order for the firm to die, they're going to have to close their door, or the firm loses their license. So if the firm or the seller that will also terminate the listing agreement. Questions? Okay. So on 223, page 223, we start talking about something called the North Carolina Residential Property Disclosure Act. And there's a couple different forms that are covered under this act. The forms covered under this act are seller disclosures. They are the seller's responsibility to complete. I can help them, I can assist them, but they're seller disclosures. The first seller disclosure we have is the Residential Property Owners Association Disclosure Statement. Who comes up with these names? You guys good if I call this the RPODs going forward? I don't have time all class to say Residential Property Owner Association Disclosure Statement. So RPODs is the seller disclosure. Do we remember caveat emptor? Caveat emptor says what? Buyer beware. Does the seller have to disclose anything? No, caveat emptor. Lead-based paint, that's the exception. Yeah, lead-based paint. But for the most part, the seller doesn't have to disclose anything. Caveat emptor. The seller still has to complete a form. This is an interesting form. They have to complete it. It's a mandatory form with optional disclosure. We're going to look at this form in just a minute, and we're going to see it's like a page and a half of this form asking the seller a bunch of questions about the house. Is your plumbing good? Is your electrical good? Is your roof good? Foundation? Any cracks or leaks or da-da. Page and a half about things that could be wrong with the property. And the seller has three choices when they fill out this form. They can say, yes, there's something wrong. No, there's nothing wrong. Or no representation. Caveat emptor says they have the right to say no representation. It's a mandatory form, meaning they have to complete it, but they're not required to disclose. They have this availability for optional disclosure. This is going to be required for most residential sellers. There are a few exceptions. Probably the biggest and most notable exception is new construction or never before lived in dwelling. Never before lived in dwelling is exempt from the RPODs because nobody's ever lived there to tell you that the components of the home are good. Nobody's ever lived there. Resales are included. And guys, the for sale by owner is also required to complete this form. Even though they're not represented, they are still required to complete this form. All agents have a duty to make sure that this form is complete and get in the hands of the buyers. I'll talk about that in a second. The RPODs is the seller's responsibility to complete. Again, I provide them the form. I say, here you go. I need you to fill this out. I'm going to explain it to them. We're going to have a conversation. I can help them. I can answer questions, but I can't do it for them. I've never lived there. I can't attest to the components of the home. I can't say, yeah, everything's fine. I can guide them. I can help them. Of course I can. But it's their responsibility to complete. And the RPODs need to be kept accurate throughout the listing. So if we take the listing today and we have the seller complete it, and maybe they say, yes, something's broke, or yes, something is leaking, and then they fix it, we need to update the RPODs. It used to be broke, but now it's not. Same thing if they say, no, this is broke, it works just fine, and then it breaks, we need to update the RPODs. We need to keep this form updated throughout the listing period. Remember we talked about disciplinary action and we talked about the e-bulletin, the wall of shame. They put your name and your firm and what you did and what they're going to do to you. Y'all know I have seen this so much in the last year or so. Agent failed to have the seller keep the RPOs accurate. I keep seeing this pop up. So if something is working and it breaks, update the RPOs. If something is broken and you fix it, update the RPOs. We got to keep this current throughout the listing period. So we have this seller disclosure mandatory form that they have to complete, they have to provide. How we get it to the buyer doesn't matter. For the most part, just in practice, generally speaking, for the most part, if the property is listed in the MLS, members of the Triad MLS were allowed to upload attachments that other members of the Triad MLS can see. These attachments don't go out to the public for you guys, but they're available to us. And for the most part, when your buyer's interested in a listing and you go to the MLS, you can pull the RPOs and the other disclosures. They, for the most part, are loaded right there in the MLS for you. So you can send on to your buyer for them to acknowledge that they've received it. If you look at a listing in MLS and it's not there, then you just call the listing agent. Do you guys have the RPOs? Do you have the other form? If it's a for sale by owner, obviously it's not going to be in MLS. So if it's a for sale by owner, we just need to get it to them and explain that they still have a duty to complete it. So what if? What if you get a stubborn seller that says, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it. Well, can I make anybody do anything? No. But what we can do is have conversations with the sellers about what that means if they don't provide it. And what that means, failure to provide, could give the buyer the right to cancel the contract. They could terminate their contract. If they put down any deposits, they'll get their money back. They have a right to contract. Failure to receive the disclosures, they have a right to cancel their contract either the end of the third day following their receipt or the end of the third day following the contract date, whichever one happens first. This generally makes a seller complete the form. That'll do it. We don't want our buyers to walk away, especially in buyers markets. Could you imagine waiting 8 months for a decent offer and then you don't do the form and your buyer terminates? Be a little frustrating, wouldn't it? If occupancy has already happened, we're probably not going to need to do the form. So in other words, if you've had a tenant living there for the last 12 years, and now we're going to do a rent to own situation, or they're going to purchase from the landlord, we're not going to need to do that form because the tenant's been there for the last 12 years. Quite frankly, they know better about the conditions of the property than what the owner does. So this is contracts, sales contracts, and it gives the buyer. And I need everybody to understand, the buyer, when they sign this, they're acknowledging receipt. They're not acknowledging the fact that they're okay that the seller said no representation. They're not acknowledging that they're okay with the way that the form was completed. They're acknowledging receipt. They're acknowledging that it was delivered to them. A lot of buyers don't like caveat emptor for good reason, right? Commission rule that covers the RPOs, 58A.0114. Again, I just have this here for reference. If you want to look it up, you know where to find it. You do not need to memorize these numbers. The other form covered under the Act, the Property Disclosure Act, is the mineral and oil and gas disclosure, affectionately referred to as the MOG. Who remembers Unit 2? Let's go way back in time. That seems like so long ago, doesn't it? Unit 2, we talked about severing your subsurface rights, and you can sever the rights to the minerals under your land and the oils and the gases. Well, the seller has a disclosure. They have to disclose to the status if they have to the buyer, if they have severed the subsurface rights or if they intend to sever the subsurface rights. Guys, remember the bottom line. A buyer deserves to know what they're buying. And if the seller has ownership of the minerals or oils or gases, the buyer has every right to know that. Would you guys agree with that? So this seller disclosure, there's a couple places where no representation is not an option. The seller's got two choices, yes or no. The MOG does apply to new construction. We do the MOG with new construction. Probably the biggest exception to the MOG is vacant land. Vacant land is not required to complete the MOG because this is covered under the North Carolina Residential Property Disclosure Act. The act only covers the sale of residential property, not vacant land. The commission rule that covers the MOG, 58A.0119, again, just here for your reference. So what I want to do now, pages, let's see, where are we? 226 through 230 in your book are the ARPOs and the MOG. I don't know these are out of date. I don't know that they're current, but you know what I know? I know the currents in the online learning system. And I think it's a lot easier for me to always direct you guys to the online learning system, except to say, except this form and that form. So general rule of thumb, when you want to look at a form, always go to the online learning system. I know I have the most current there. So in the Unit 8 material, we first off have our ARPOs, Residential Property and Owners Association Disclosure Statement. You can see it starts with instructions to property owners. Once again, we can use the forms to help put words in our mouth. So when we're telling the sellers they have to do this and they go, do I really have to? We have the forms to help us be able to have these conversations with the seller. The seller has three choices when they're asked, is there a problem with this? Is there a problem with that? They can either say yes, they can say no, or they can say no representation. Maybe they're choosing to exercise their rights under caveat emptor. Maybe they genuinely don't know if there's a problem or not. Or maybe they're the shady seller that's trying to hide something and wants to avoid everything by saying no representation. Caveat emptor, they have that right to say no representation no matter what. Regardless of how the seller completes this form, the buyer's always encouraged to do their own inspections and their own investigations. That's the second piece of caveat emptor. The responsibility of learning about the property is on the buyer. So no matter if the seller says, there are no problems with this house whatsoever, buyer needs to do inspections. If the seller says, yeah, this and this is a problem, if the seller says no representation, the buyer's always encouraged, they have that responsibility to complete their own inspections and investigations. We got a note to the buyer, which talks about their right to cancel. So if they don't have this completed form in their hand, it talks about the rights that they have to terminate their contract, get any deposits back. We put the property address, the owner name, and then the owner sign it. So the seller's completing this in addition to all of our other listing paperwork that we have. And we're going to have the seller complete it and sign it. And then we're going to load it in MLS. If you're putting it in the MLS, we're going to load it in the MLS. So when the buyer goes to make the offer, they can sign it along with their other offer paperwork, and they can attach it all in a nice, neat little package Again, the buyer's not signing that they like the way it was completed. They're signing that they've received it, and that's all they're signing for. They're acknowledging receipt. So then we go to page 2, and I'll let you guys look at this. We're going to scroll through pretty quickly, but you can see we're going to ask a lot of questions about the home. Is there any leak with the roof? Is there any water seepage or leakage? Is there any problems with the plumbing system, with the heating and air conditioning, etc.? And we're going to go through a page and a half and ask sellers about known problems of the property, in which they have 3 choices. Yes, there's a problem. No, there's not a problem. Or I'm going to exercise my right under caveat emptor and say no representation. So we go through all sorts of good stuff. Page 1, half of this one, we get down through here. If you answered yes to any of the questions, please explain. Did you say something was broke or not working? Tell me more. Tell me more about what was broke, what's not working. Remember too, you guys, regardless how the seller completes this form, we always have a duty to disclose material facts. So if the seller says the roof leaks, but I'm going to say no representation, that's their right, but I have a duty to disclose that material fact. Everybody good with that? Shh, don't tell anybody. I can only follow my client's lawful instructions. We always have that duty. The last page and a half of this form, if it's in an owner's association, if it's not an owner's association, then we don't need to worry about it. I see a lot of times it's just the last page and a half here is crossed out. But if it is in an owner's association, the seller may choose to disclose information about the owner's association. So you see we got information here about the owners. What are the HOA dues? The X amount per month, per quarter, per year, however that's addressed. Just providing information. And then the last piece of this, which I actually like a whole lot, the seller can, because buyers, when you find out they got to pay HOA dues, buyers want to know, what are they paying for? What's included in my HOA dues? So this gives us a nice little breakdown about things that may or may not be covered if the seller knows and if they're willing to represent that. So the first disclosure is our RPODs, Residential Property and Owner Association Disclosure Statement. The other seller disclosure is the MOG, Mineral and Oil and Gas Right Disclosure. Again, it starts with instructions to property owners, what they need to know to properly complete this, what their rights are, their duties. Mineral and oil and gas rights disclosures, just kind of bold, so it's alerting people to various things that they need to know. And then we have the representation. And the easiest way to see this is to take this portion and divide it in 2. So the top half is asking the seller various questions about the mineral rights. Were the mineral rights severed by the previous owner? In which case the seller says yes, no, or no representation. Then we ask if the seller has severed the mineral rights or if the seller intends to sever the mineral rights. And you will notice for those 2 questions, no representation is not an option. The seller has to say yes or no, I have severed, yes or no, I intend to sever. And then we go through that same little exercise again. They were severed from the previous owners. The seller had severed or intends to sever. And we go through that again with oil and gas rights. If your listing agent or buyer's agent and the seller says yes to any of these, that's a little flag we need to get with an attorney. because severance of subsurface rights is a big legal issue, a big legal thing that just got out of our pay grade really fast. So if the seller has severed or intends to sever, your buyer specifically, particularly, is going to get with the attorney again, so they can learn what they're buying, so they can understand what that means to them. Note to purchasers, again, just talking about their right to cancel if they don't receive this form. Property address, owner name, the owner signs it, they complete it, they sign it, seller disclosure. We load it in the MLS, and when the buyer's ready to make an offer, they can sign it, send it in with the offer. If you don't see it in the MLS, just call the listing agent. Hey, I'm getting ready to write you up an offer. Got the RPOs and the MOG you can send me? Seller disclosures. I cannot complete this for them, these guys. I can help them. That's why they have me. If you're a buyer's agent that's interested in a for sale by owner, you may have to give the form to the for sale by owner and say, I need you to complete these for my buyers, right? We're aiding, we're helping this. We're making this happen. We just need to help a little bit. Questions on our seller disclosures, RPOs or MOG?
I'm assuming since it's just oil specifically listed that if none of that prevents you from drilling a well, a water well.
No, unless you find mineral oils or gas, that's what's going to be covered in that form. Y'all want to know where that form came from? The story I heard real quick, out in Texas. Why do things always, the things either happen in Texas or California, right? So this time it happened in Texas. And there was a builder who's going to remain nameless that bought this huge tract of land and subdivided it into, 150 lots or whatever. They severed the oil rights. We're in Texas. You know what's in the ground in Texas? Oil. They severed the rights, but they didn't disclose. So now they start selling all these homes. I got a homeowner in the backyard one day digging, and lo and behold, strikes oil and said, we're rich. And the builder said, that's mine. I own the rights to that oil. So this huge lawsuit followed, and the result was a form that we all now get to use for everybody to disclose. We don't deal much with mineral and oil here in North Carolina. I'm not saying it's not there, but I tell you what's getting really big, really fast, and where we're going to start seeing this form. Y'all heard of fracking yet? And extracting those gases from the ground? There's certain, I think if you go down east, if I have anybody down east, you're probably dealing with fracking already more than what we are. So my crystal ball says that may be something that's coming in our near future, and I don't know, we may get a new form for that. We'll see. There's almost always a form for everything. So with the Disclosure Act, again, what does that Disclosure Act mean for us? Well, we always have that duty to discover and disclose material facts, regardless of how the seller completes. I do not care how the seller completes that form. They get to hide behind caveat emptor. You and I do not. We have to follow license law and commission rule. And all agents in the transaction, we're going to work to get that form from the seller to the buyer. Again, the example I gave is an attachment in MLS. That's probably the most common. There is no commission rule that says how we get it to the buyer. The commission rule just says that we aid in the delivery to the buyer, that they have that when they're making that decision. Questions? I know we're a few minutes early for break, but we're getting ready to switch gears and we're going to start talking about working with buyers. So I hate to start something and then, 3 minutes later say, okay, let's take a break. So let's go ahead and take our break. When we come back, we're going to work with some buyers. And we're back. Y'all ready to work with some buyers? All right, so before we do that, get too excited. Let me take attendance. So cameras are on. Who was Ashley? That was great. Thank you. All right, so we talked about the RPODs. Now we're going to switch gears and talk specifically about working with buyers. Private chat. And I have taken attendance. So if you're just coming back, please let me know. Private chat. When we first start working with buyers, what's one of the very first things we want to do? What's one of the earliest things we do when we start working with and talking to this new buyer? Look at all y'all with your abbreviations. I already got you guys talking broker. You're speaking a language. So when we meet buyers, one of the first things very early on in the relationship is to do our working with real estate agent disclosure. We need to let the buyer know, big thing, I don't owe you confidentiality until and if you decide to hire me. So we need to make sure that we cover that. Particularly with buyers, the Real Estate Commission says that once we do our working with real estate at disclosure, at that time, we need to decide in what capacity we're going to work. I need to know now where in my plane I'm going to put you. Am I going to put you in first class, give you old car, be your buyer's agent, let you be my client? Or am I going to put you back in coach, give you honesty, fairness, and the disclosure material fact, and let you be my customer? We need to decide how you're going to proceed early on and what capacity we're going to work. I mean, really, if we think about it, buyers have more choices to make than sellers, right? Sellers either hire you or they don't. It's pretty simple. Buyers have to decide, do I want to hire her? Do I want her to be my seller sub-agent? Do I want to be a customer? Do I want to be a client? There's so many more decisions, not really, but like 2 more decisions for the buyer than the seller. But again, we got to know how we're going to proceed so we know what services to offer, so we know what duties. So let's talk first about working as a seller sub-agent. If we're going to work as a seller sub-agent, that means we're working with an unrepresented buyer. That means we have a buyer customer. If we're working as a seller sub-agent, whose side of the agency wall am I on? Whose side am I on? I'm on the seller side. This buyer has chosen to go unrepresented. This buyer has chosen to be a customer. Remember, before we can do this, we have to have the seller's permission for that particular property, each particular property. Guys, here's the deal. If we're going to proceed as a seller sub-agent, I don't get to say this often in real estate. We don't have a form for this. There's nothing for them to sign. They chose not to hire me. We have the conversation. We obviously want to document the conversation, make sure they know what that means. But I don't have a form. If they want to proceed unrepresented, we go. Nothing to fill out. I really do think, and I don't want you guys to get stressed out about this. We're just going to stress out about it for the test, but not for your career. Because I really do think most buyers want to be represented. Who in the world doesn't want to be represented, right? I think most buyers want to be represented. First-time home buyers, they have no idea what they're doing. Somebody that hasn't bought in 15 years, where things have changed so much. Buying a house today is not the same it was 15 years ago. They're probably going to want to be represented to make sure that they're protected throughout the transaction. In my experience, the buyers that don't need representation, the buyers where this may fall under, is going to be your investor that buys 10, 15 homes a year. They do this in some cases more often than the agent, right? So they may know more about what's going on. Again, nobody has to hire you. That's just my personal experience.
Is there any benefit in them going unrepresented?
They don't know you commission ever.
Well, but buyer doesn't generally pay that anyway.
But if the seller doesn't, and I have a buyer's agency agreement, then my buyer does. Unrepresented seller, nothing. So I'm either collecting from the seller or I'm not getting paid. I feel like, this is my personal opinion, I feel like if we're doing our jobs right and we're explaining agency and we're explaining the differences up front, most buyers are going to want to hire you, right? Most buyers. If we're not explaining it right, if we're not doing a good job, there may be confusion and they may say, oh, you know what, I'm just going to go unrepresented, right? So this comes back to being familiar with the forms and the verbiage and having these conversations with buyers to help them understand. So what if you meet this buyer, you don't do a good job explaining, or they don't understand and they say, I just really want to be unrepresented. So you guys go out, you're a seller sub-agent, you go out and you find a property. And then maybe the buyer says, you know what, now that we have found the property, I think I want to switch. I think I do want to be represented through this transaction. So let's talk about what switching from a seller sub-agent to a buyer's agent could look like. First, this is not the most recommended method of conducting your business. It is strongly discouraged. Again, if we can do it right up front, we probably won't be here later down the road. But let's think about what we're doing when we're making that switch. I am switching the buyer from my customer to my client. The buyer's getting an upgrade. Yes, the buyer's going from coach to first class. Sounds pretty good. What's happening to the seller? The seller's getting a downgrade. I'm switching sides of that agency wall. Bless you. And before I can make that switch, I need to have a serious conversation with the seller. If I know anything about the seller, I need to remind them what I know. Because once I make that switch, I now share everything I know about the seller to the buyer. The buyer's not going to have a problem getting on board with this. It's going to be the seller. So let's say, for example, as a seller sub-agent, I know how low the seller is willing to go. We have the home listed for X amount, and I know the seller is willing to go $20,000 after that. As soon as I make that switch, don't I have a duty to tell my buyer, by the by, I know the seller is willing to accept this. Isn't it only fair that I remind the seller what I know and that I get their permission to make the switch? Guys, we talk to people all day, every day. Yes, you talk to people all day, every day. And it's hard to remember things that you told people 2 days ago, 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago. We can't just look at the seller and say, okay, I'm switching from a seller sub-agent to buyer agent. The seller needs to be reminded, this is what I know about you that could possibly affect you in this transaction. So when we say we can only do it with fully informed consent, that's of both parties. And I need you guys to document the heck out of this. Make sure that you very clearly explain to the seller, I know how low you're willing to go. I know your terms. I know your motivation. I know what you had for lunch today. I know everything there is to possibly know about you. Are you good with me doing this? Again, you guys, the reason it's discouraged is because they don't want us running around conducting our business like this. This is not good general practice for business. This is like a last ditch effort. This is like a very rare thing. We shouldn't be trying to get unrepresented buyers and hope to convert them later. We should be conducting our business that we either start as a seller sub-agent or a buyer's agent, and the buyer understands what that means. So working as a seller subagent. We may also have, if your firm allows, we may also have the option to enter with your buyer into a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement. Non-exclusive buyer agency agreement means the buyer's free to date as how many firms? Yeah, they're out there playing the field, aren't they? I'm in an agency agreement. I owe them OCAR. It's just non-exclusive. We actually have a form called non-exclusive buyer agency agreement. Whether or not you're allowed to use this will come down to your firm's policy. That's in your book.
Can you, sorry, I'm starting to get confused. Can you explain what a buyer sub-agent is again?
Now there's a seller subagent.
Okay,
You're under who as a seller subagent?
the seller, the list
Seller, which means the buyer is your
customer,
client or customer?
customer.
Customer. You got it.
Oh, so that's it? Oh. so
You're
not-
making it harder than what it is. Y'all like to do that with seller sub-agency, by the way. It's already hard enough. It doesn't need your help. So keep it simple. Now we're talking about being a buyer agent. We've been hired to be a buyer agent, in this case, a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement. Buyers free to date as many firms as they want to. The only one that's going to get paid is the one that introduced the buyer to the property. That's what we mean by the procuring cause. What chain of events led to this buyer being introduced to the property? Another good reason to document, right? So you can prove that chain of events, so you can collect commission if it ever comes into question. So non-exclusive buyer agency agreement. We do also have the opportunity when we first meet a buyer to work with them under an oral buyer agency agreement. Oral buyer agency is buyer agency. In an oral buyer agency agreement, I owe this buyer OCAR. This buyer is my client. We have orally created this relationship. It's a handshake agreement for right now. This is an express agreement, which means the terms have been clearly stated. Guys, I'm never allowed to just start acting like your agent without first explaining what it means for me to be your agent. We can't have an implied relationship. So these are express. We need to discuss the terms. Oral buyer agency commission rule says that we have to get this thing in writing before we're ready to present the first offer for the buyer. I cannot present an offer for a buyer under an oral buyer agency agreement. I can show you property. I can write the offer up. I can ask you, what do you want? How much do you want to offer? When do you want to close? Seller pay closing costs. We can fill in the blanks of the contract together. But about the time that I'm ready to present it, and by present it means I'm contacting the seller or the listing agent and saying, here is my buyer's offer. That offer is changing sides. The buyer is delivering it, handing it, presenting it to the seller. I cannot do that. I cannot send it to the seller or the listing agent without putting this agreement in writing. Another place where they like to trick you. Please make sure we're paying attention to the answer choices. You may see one that says must reduce to writing before writing the first offer, before showing the property, for example. It's all about presenting the offer. Got to put it in writing by then. Couple caveats we talked about. Oral buyer agency is non-exclusive. You cannot demand exclusivity in an oral buyer agency agreement. And we also cannot specify a period of time. I cannot say we're going to work together for 2 weeks or 2 months under an oral agreement. If I want to put a time limit on us, I got to get it in writing. So as long as I don't demand exclusivity, and as long as I don't put a period of time on it, we can work as an oral buyer agency agreement until I'm ready to present the offer on their behalf. So then the other way we can work with buyers is an exclusive buyer agency agreement. I need you guys for your test questions to pay attention to that word exclusive. If you see a test question that says exclusive buyer agency agreement, you know for a fact that this thing is in writing. You can't have a non-exclusive oral agreement. Everybody with me? So exclusive buyer agency agreement, is it in writing? Absolutely. One firm is hired, buyer's only dating one firm. When the buyer buys and that deed changes hands, buyer or the firm gets paid. We don't have as many reasons to terminate an agency agreement, exclusive agency agreement with the buyers as we do the sellers. So with our buyers, either these things are going to either expire or we're going to get your buyer to closing. This is the form that we're going to look at in just a minute. Exclusive buyer agency agreement. So, congratulations, you've been hired as a buyer agent. You have a buyer client. Is that exciting? Heck yeah. That's why we're here. Let's look together on page 239. Now that you've been hired, what does that mean? Page 239, we start looking at some of the buyer's agent's responsibilities. What are the buyer's agent's responsibilities to the buyer? We got it right there. One of the first things we're going to do is that working with real estate agent disclosure. When you meet the buyer, if you call them in for a buyer consultation, guys, remember, I can't start asking the buyer a lot of questions. How much do you want to spend? Where do you want to buy? Where are you looking? I can't start asking them a bunch of questions without first doing the disclosure. I can't have the buyer volunteer a lot of information without first doing the disclosure. So make sure you're doing these disclosures early on to protect them. Then we're going to explain our agency duties and responsibilities, which handy is spelled out in our buyer agency agreement. So we have the list of our duties and responsibilities in our agreement. Make sure that the paperwork is properly filled out, properly completed. Probably one of the earlier things we're going to do, like after the disclosure. One thing we want to make sure is that we get our buyer to talk to a lender. We need to know before I take you out, start showing you property. I need to know how much home you can afford. I need to know what you're pre-approved or pre-qualified for. We want to make sure, we want to encourage our buyers to shop lenders, talk to 2 or 3 different lenders. They're all different, kind of like real estate agents and firms. They're all different. They all offer a different product. So the buyer needs to know, guys, in some cases with a home loan, they're going to make a 30-year commitment. That's a long time. Yes, some of you aren't even 30 years old. That is a long, long time. Why would they not shop around? Why would they not talk to 2 or 3 lenders and make sure that they're getting the best deal for them? We're going to talk more about pre-qualifications and pre-approvals and the whole lending process. That's when we get into units 14 and 15, which are our financing units. So we'll revisit that, spend more time with that. We're going to help our buyer get their hands on the seller disclosure. So there's our RPODs again, our MOG. Our lead-based paint addendum, if the property was built prior to 1978. We're going to help them get those disclosures. We're going to disclose agency status to all parties in the transactions. Remember, now that you're hired as a buyer's agent, anytime you communicate with the seller or the seller's agent, we have a duty to disclose my status of being a buyer's agent at initial contact. So anytime I'm contacting the seller, I say, my name is Julie Campbell and I'm working with a buyer. So make sure we disclose our agency status. As a buyer's agent, I'm going to help my buyer discover and disclose material facts about the property. Guys, as a buyer's agent, when I walk in the front door, I always need to be on the lookout for red flags. Here's the deal. When you're showing property to buyers, you guys are in the same property, but we should be looking at two different things. The buyer walks in the front door figuring out if this home will fit their family dynamics. Can we see ourselves doing family Friday night game night here? Do we have a place for everybody to have an office or a little schoolroom if they need to, right? The buyers are looking to see if the space fits their needs. Can we see our family here? You and I need to help them by looking at everything else. We need to be looking at the ceilings and the walls and the floors and looking around for stuff because they're not. They're still going in with rose-colored glasses. We need to help them see the things that they're not seeing. Does this make sense? It doesn't matter what I think of the house. It doesn't matter if my family works here or not, because I'm not the one buying it. And I get asked that all the time. Well, Julie, what do you think? I think it's a lovely home, but I need to know what you think. Would this work for me and my family? Maybe it will, maybe it not. But guess what? It doesn't matter because I can guarantee you my family is different than yours. But what I can do is help my buyers by pointing stuff out to them, by helping them see things that they're not seeing with those rose-colored glasses. To discover and disclose material facts, always on the lookout for those little red flags. We're going to perform a CMA, comparative market analysis, for our buyer to help them determine an appropriate offer price. Remember, we just did a CMA to help the seller determine probable sales price. But now at some point, the buyer's going to find the one. They're going to say, let's write it up. And they're going to look at you and they're going to say, how much should I offer? You want to just blurt a number out there? I wouldn't. So we're going to do a CMA for those buyers too. We're going to help them determine an appropriate offer price. What are they comfortable with? What are they willing to offer? We're going to assist them in the preparation of the offer and all the documents that go with the offer. We're going to present the offer on their behalf. We're going to help them negotiate. We're going to help them get the deal that's good for them. And hopefully, upon successful negotiations, we're going to get them under contract. And then we're going to help them get ready for closing. We're going to help them get the closing paperwork, do their inspections. They have a period of time where they can do inspections, where they can investigate the property. We're getting there in Unit 10 when we look specifically at our offer to purchase and contract. Remember we said the other day that for the most part, I mean, there's still more work to do, but the big chunk of the listing agent's work is done up front before we ever list the property. Guess what? A big chunk of the buyer's agent's work is done when the buyer says, this is the one, let's write it up. That's when we're going to assist them in getting it under contract, doing their inspections and their investigations. Prior to that, we're just driving all over town looking at pretty houses. Some of them aren't so pretty.
Question.
Mhm.
So you do your CMAs and you're realizing that that house is too expensive for the area.
Mhm.
So you're just going to tell the guy, you know, it's actually higher than, I mean, because that's obviously what the other people want. So how much would you go down? If you're selling a house for 350 and they want to offer 320, is that an insult or what?
You know what I've learned? All buyers have a different risk tolerance. And that's part of the conversation with the buyers, is helping them determine what they're comfortable. If you're not comfortable with 350, if you want to do 320, all we can do is present the offer and see what the sellers are going to take, right? There's no guarantee. I don't know what they'll say. I don't know the seller's motivation, probably don't know the seller's motivation for selling. But what I do know by doing a CMA is that gives me an opportunity to say, this is what the probable sales price is. What do you want to do with that? Remember, I'm a fact finder. I find the facts. I help gather the information so they can make an informed decision. It comes down to what their risk tolerance is. How badly do they want this property? If they really, really want this property, if it checks off all their boxes, and they might be willing to go more, negotiate more, right? So there's really no formula to negotiating. Sellers always start up here, buyers start here. Negotiations gets us closer and closer to hopefully one day we can get together and get under contract. All I can do is present the facts, the CMA. Numbers don't lie, right? I know this much about life. Numbers don't lie. So by saying to the buyer, this is what the numbers say, what do you want to do with this information? How low or how high do you want to go? It happens. It's a strategy. It's a negotiation. Last year, buyers were paying $50,000 more, in some cases $125,000 more than asking price. I'm not kidding. Sellers, for the most part, were not the ones driving the market up last year. They were listing it, for the most part, appropriately. The buyers drove the market up by offering $100,000 more than asking price. It was that competitive last year. Anybody try to buy a house last year? Couple of you? Yeah, I'm sorry. That was rough, wasn't it? Things are a little bit different this year. We're seeing some changes. Now that you're a buyer's agent, you've been hired as a buyer's agent, you may, as a buyer's agent, come across the opportunity to work with a for sale by owner or to work with the limited listing service. If your buyer is interested in either one of these properties. With the for sale by owner, the FSBO is unrepresented, which means they didn't hire a firm. They don't have representation. Maybe the FSBO will pay you, maybe they won't. We always got to ask. Remember, we looked at our protection agreement last night, that if they do agree to pay me, okay, that sounds nice, but I need you to sign this form officially agreeing to pay me. If the seller won't pay, then the buyer does. That's what our buyer's agency agreement says. Buyer's agency agreement says I will always ask the seller to pay me first. But if they can't or won't, then you have to. Guys, in a sales contract, there's only two parties to the transaction. There's only two people that can pay me. So if the seller's not going to do it, who's left? The buyer. And that's what our buyer's agency agreement covers with our commission. And we're getting ready to see in just a minute. We also talked last night about, as a buyer's agent, your buyer may be interested in a property that's listed by a limited listing service. Remember, with these limited listing service, the seller's represented. They have hired a firm. They're getting old car from somebody. The only thing that's limited are the services that they're receiving. And if the MLS says present all offers directly to the seller, then that's what you do. We follow those instructions. If this is something that your buyer's interested in, always remember, in both of these cases, you may be, with the FSBO especially, but with the limited listing service, you may be communicating directly with the seller. So in both of these cases, you need to remember always who you represent, what side of the agency wall you fall under. So up next, we have our exclusive buyer agency agreement, standard form 201. Again, you don't need to know the numbers, just there for reference. The couple provisions, page 240 and 241. A lot of the buyer's agency agreement is very similar to the listing agreement, but there are a few different provisions. So those are mentioned on 240, 241, and we will see those. So let's get out of this for a minute. And let's go back to the online learning system. And let's look at our exclusive buyer agency agreement, again with highlights. If it's in the syllabus, it's a good candidate for your exam. If it's in the syllabus, I've highlighted it here for you guys. Please, please go through and look at the highlights. Don't try to read this whole form right now. You'll read it eventually, I promise. But for right now, let's just focus on the highlights so we know, prepare, start introducing ourselves to these forms. So again, this is our exclusive buyer agency agreement. As with our listing agreement, it comes with guidelines to complete. If you're ever stuck, if you're not sure of what goes in a blank, you can always refer to the guidelines. Exclusive buyer agency agreement is entered into between the buyer and the firm. The relationship is between the buyer and the firm. Buyer represents that they are not a party to a buyer representation with another firm. They represent that they have received a copy of the working with real estate agent disclosure and reviewed it with the firm. Again, that's past tense, isn't it? We're not giving them the disclosure now. They're acknowledging that we've already done this. They have already received it. Buyer further represents that they disclose to the firm about any properties that are described below. So one thing we have in our buyer's agency agreement that is different than our listing agreement is the type of property. We need to identify what kind of buyer am I working with? Is this buyer looking at a residential property? They're looking at a commercial property or something. Maybe it's a warehouse or an industrial. We're also gonna identify the general location. Are we going to help this buyer find a home in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, the Triad, the state of North Carolina? What's the general location that we're assisting this buyer with? Remember we said last night or the night before, when you're in an oral buyer agency agreement, and now they're ready to present an offer and they're hesitant to sign this agency agreement, we may be able to get them to sign because we can put the actual address. We can create buyer's agency with just one address. So be like, look, we'll sign an agency agreement for 123 Main Street. If you buy it, if it goes through, I'm your agent. If not, we still have an oral buyer agency agreement. We can still go back out and look at property. But if they're hesitant to sign this thing, know that this general location gives me an option of just creating agency for one property. Hopefully you can continue to gain their trust so they be more apt to sign an agency agreement. If this one doesn't work out, be more apt to sign an agency agreement with you. As with our listing agreement, we have a term. We need a definite end date. It's going to begin on this date. Different from the agency agreement, we could be working with two different buyers. We could be working for a buyer who intends to purchase a single property, or for buyers who intend to purchase more than one. Is this a home buyer buying a one property, or is this an investor that calls you and says, I want to buy 10 this year, can you help me? So we can determine what type of relationship this is. Either one that we check we need a definite expiration date. We need to put an actual date in here, identifying how long our relationship will last. It's going to end at 11:59 p.m. on this date. Then we get into compensation. Firm acknowledges receipt. We talked about the retainer fee last night. If your firm allows and you want to collect a retainer fee, this is where we would do that. Buyer agrees that the firm's fee shall be in the amount of, we're going to put in a dollar amount, a percentage, whatever we expect to collect. And then here it is, and I think this is very important. Firm shall seek fee from the cooperating listing or from the seller if there is no listing firm. Buyer agrees that the firm shall be entitled to collect. If the buyer purchases where compensation offered is less than the fee or no compensation is offered at all, buyer and firm agree that the buyer will pay the difference. Again, our buyer agency agreement says, buyer, I'm always going to go to the seller first, either through MLS or directly asking the for sale by owner. If they can't or won't pay me, you are up. Please always remember, our agency agreements are employment contracts. We cannot be hired to do a job without discussing how we want to get paid. Guys, I have seen this so many times. I've heard about this, so I'm trying to squash this with you newbies. I have seen where agents say, well, the seller's paying my commission anyway. The buyer's not going to pay my commission. So I'm just going to put a 0 in here. Well, that sounds all fine and dandy until your buyer's interested in a for sale by owner and the FSBO is not willing to pay you. And then you turn to the buyer and you say, you have to pay me. And they say, well, according to our legally binding agreement, I owe you a whopping how much? 0. Don't do that to yourself. Do you see the importance of properly completing these forms? We always put the amount in that your firm expects to collect when you assist a buyer in buying. And if the seller's not going to pay you, you can collect from the buyer. What questions? I think that's the problem topic of the buyer's agency agreement. You guys were all raised, all of you, seller pays commission, seller pays commission, seller pays commission. I'm telling you, there are times that maybe the seller won't, which means the buyer has to.
So where that 0 is, even though you'll put the amount that.
That's right. So I'll put whatever my firm expects to collect is a percentage or a flat fee. Yep.
And you tell the buyer that's not guaranteed, but it's only if the seller denies, right?
Yep. Firm shall seek the fee from the listing firm. Yep. We're going to have these conversations, and it's right here. Once again, use the forms to help you put words in your mouth. Don't just assume that if the seller's not going to pay you, the buyer's going to be more than happy to step up and whip out their checkbook. We got to have that in an agreement. Remember what I said, and I stand behind it and I mean it. There ain't nobody that's going to look after your commission like you. Make sure you're protected. Other questions on that? Comments?
If I've bought several houses and I don't think I've ever paid this close of attention to on the buyer side. So the amount put here or the percentage, and we as buyers don't see what the seller's percentage is going to be, because that's in the private information between brokers.
Correct.
So all we see is the HUD-1 form that breaks down who's paying how much.
Mm-hmm.
if the seller is saying, we'll pay the buyer's agent 0.5%, then that's not enough for most buyers agents firms.
Correct.
So this amount gets kicked in. Are we going to see that, or it just kind of gets buried in the HUD one?
Your commission, you have cooperation in MLS. So when your buyer says, I want to see 123 Main Street, the agent can see in MLS, the seller's only willing to pay you 0.5%. The listing firm is only willing to pay you 0.5%. The buyer agrees to pay you whatever your firm expects to collect. And the buyer's agreeing that they will make up the difference if the seller is not willing to pay that amount.
But does that conversation become oral, or it's just because it's in the contract, it just kind of gets wrapped into escrow?
Well, I hope it becomes a conversation. I hope it's I hope I say, Tom, I got you to sign this agency agreement that says you're going to pay me. Let's make a number up. 5%. I want a 5% commission when I help you buy a house. And if the seller's only offering me 2%, hopefully I'm a decent enough agent to come back to you and say, they're not offering enough. I need you to cover the difference. But quite frankly, I don't know how that's going to play off in a court of law, because you signed this agency agreement too. So the judge is going to come back and say, why didn't you read this? Right? Both parties have that duty, but hopefully the agent is having the conversation with the client.
I'm just wondering, is that a required conversation, or?
I don't
just
think there's a
courtesy?
commission rule that says that you have to have that conversation. I just think that's common courtesy.
Right.
Make sure we're all on the same page. I really do think that this is the biggest problem topic of the buyer agency agreement. Like I said, we're always going to ask the seller first. And if they can't pay the full amount, or if they're not willing to pay what your firm expects to collect for working with this buyer, then they're up. And look, guys, this has happened so much. The forms committee has actually put this in. Do not insert NA or 0. Do you know how much you're entitled to if you insert 0 or NA? Exactly that amount. This come up and not, and maybe Tom, that's to your point. Maybe that's another good reason to have this conversation. But the forms committee said, my gosh, we're just going to put this in here in italics to make sure that it stands out a little bit better. We've having these conversations when we're forming these relationships. So we've discussed compensation with the buyer. Again, the majority of the time, the seller pays, it's not a problem. But that one time, that one buyer that wants a 1 for sale by owner, this is what's protecting you. This is what's coming into place. I'm pretty sure you only have to get stiffed once before you'll learn your lesson. Is that a fair assumption? We talked last night about when we earn our compensation. There's a difference in when we earn it versus when we actually get paid. So we addressed that in the buyer's agency as well as the listing agreement. We also talked last night about the protection period. If your buyer agency agreement terminates and the buyer makes an offer the next day on a property you introduced them to, you may still be entitled to a commission. That's our protection agreement. It's protecting us. Again, these are bilateral contracts. So the firm has duties and responsibilities to the buyer. The buyer has duties and responsibilities to the firm. So we have to list the firm's duty. We're going to perform the terms of this contract. We're going to seek a property at a price and terms acceptable to the buyer. We're going to present offers on their behalf in a timely manner. We're going to disclose all material facts about the property, which we know, and we're going to properly account for all monies. Firm has a duty of confidentiality, a reasonable standard of care, representation of others. There have been cases, especially last year, you may, as one agent, be working with 2 buyers, and then lo and behold, both those buyers become interested in the same property. Doesn't that sound like fun? We need to make sure that we're treating both fair. I can't favor one over the other. I can't try to, well, I know this guy offered this much, so do you want to beat it? Well, you want to beat this guy? I can't pit my buyers together. Remember what we just said, all buyers have a different risk tolerance. So as long as you're providing the same information, the same facts to both buyers and letting them make the decision about what they're comfortable offering, about what they want to do. Can you be the same agent working with two buyers, making an offer on the same property? Absolutely. That exclusivity only goes one way. The buyer can only date one firm. The firm can
Do you
date as many
have to-
buyers as they want. Yeah.
Sorry, Julie, do you have to disclose that to the other buyer, like to both buyers?
I don't know that you have to, you know, it may
Okay.
not be a terrible idea. Again, I don't think there's a commission rule that says you have to.
Okay, thank
Buyers
you.
may get a little nervous, right? They may have some questions.
I would.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you.
Let's see, what else is green? Here's our non-discrimination clause again. We saw this last night in the listing agreement. Again, we're going to talk about these protected classes and what all these mean. Unit 19. And then here's the buyer's duties to the firm. Work exclusively with the firm. Immediately refer the firm information about any of the properties that the buyer may be interested in. The buyer's going to let you communicate with the listing agent and the seller. So they're going to talk to you, you're going to talk on their behalf. Buyer has a duty of complying with reasonable requests so we can get information to get you qualified, for example, for a loan. Being available for reasonable periods of time to examine properties. This is why we need a flexible schedule. Not all buyers work when you don't. Some buyers work Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. Some work third shift. Some work weekends. So we need to be flexible so we can work around their schedule and show them property. I've had 2 buyers now that work third shift. I'm out there at like 8 o'clock in the morning showing them property when they're getting off work. Big coffee day, right? You know, I've had other buyers, again, those third shift buyers, they say, I go to work at 7 o'clock tonight. Can you show me a property? I'm like, sure. I'd love to show you home at 6:30 tonight. Let's go see it, right? We, a lot of times, work around their schedule. That's our flexibility. Examine properties only by appointment. We need to make sure that when a buyer is visiting a home, that they're doing it with us, and we are scheduling these appointments with the sellers. Again, we're the one communicating, we're the one that are scheduling the appointments, we're the one doing all that work. I don't think it's a bad idea to have a conversation with your buyers about not going to the home without you. There have been cases where, especially when we go under contract, buyers are taking it upon themselves to, you know, go to the home in the evening, and sellers are sitting in their living room watching TV, and all of a sudden here comes the buyers looking in the window. Sellers are a little freaked out about that. I think some people call that trespassing. So just make sure your buyers know that it's not their home yet. And if they ever want to visit it, they need to schedule it with you. Is it funny we have to have these conversations? It happens. So we're examining the properties only by appointment. Conducting all negotiations and communications through the firm, conducting all due diligence on the property, talking about that when we get to our contract. And then the buyer's responsible for paying all their inspections and investigations. So anything that they want to do to learn about the property, those expenses are on them. Again, we'll talk about that. We'll see that when we get to our contract. Other professional advice, this was mentioned in the listing agreement, but it's much more applicable to the buyers than it is the sellers. You get under contract and your buyer is going to look at you and say, who should I use for a home inspector? Who should I use for a pest inspector? Who should I use for a surveyor? Who do I use? Guys, for the most part, buyers don't know these people. That's why they have you. You will start meeting these vendors as you get out. Trust me, home inspectors like to bring you lunch or donuts or whatever, you know, so you'll start meeting a lot of these vendors. most of your firms will have a preferred vendor list where you can say, if you're brand new and you don't know a home inspector yet, you can look at your buyer and say, here's a list of 3 home inspectors that my firm recommends, right? We can give them recommendations. I can't make them use anybody on my recommendation list, but at least I'm not sending them out to Google and letting them find a home inspector just willy-nilly, right? I'm going to offer some kind, that's what we mean by professional advice. I'm going to give some kind of guidance, some kind of counsel in this. You'll know people. I'm telling you, once you start getting these people on speed dial, there ain't nothing like having a home inspector on speed dial. A lender, an attorney, there ain't nothing like it. Preserve those relationships because they can be valuable. Confidentiality of offers. There's a commission rule that we're getting to. And the commission rule says that we cannot disclose the terms of the offer without the offeror's permission. Remember our OR and EE? The offeror in this case would be the buyer. They are the giver of the offer. And I cannot disclose the terms of their offer without their permission. So if you're in a multiple listing situation, you can't pitch your buyers together, your offerors together. If you're that case where you're the same buyer, and you're the same agent, and you have 2 buyers both interested in the same property, I can't pit them. I can't look at my first buyer and say, I know what Joe's offering, and then look at my second buyer and say, I know what Keith is offering, right? I cannot disclose those terms without their permission. And do y'all think anybody in their right mind is going to give you permission to disclose the terms of their offer? Oh, don't want to give them that advantage. So make sure you're keeping your mouth shut. Guys, this has gotten agents in trouble. There is no rule out there that says they can't call you and ask. The rule addresses is how you answer that. So last year and the year before, in this multiple offer world that we lived in, agents were calling listing agents and saying, what's the highest priced offer you have in your hand right now? There's nothing wrong with asking. What's wrong is how they answer. And if they say the highest price offer I have in my hand right now is, they violated this confidentiality of the offers, because I'm assuming they don't have that offeror's permission. Think before you speak. Dual agency, page 4 in the buyer's agency agreement is dual agency. We looked last night. I encourage you guys to look at dual agency as it's explained to the seller. Now I'm encouraging you guys to look at dual agency as it's explained to the buyer. So this talks about the firm's role as a dual agent, the buyer's role, designated dual agent. And then again, like we saw last night, we got to get the buyers to either authorize dual agency or say they want exclusive representation and they do not authorize dual agency. This is an or thing. If they agree to dual agency, can we and will we take this a step further and offer designated dual agency? Having these conversations as we work through this agency agreement together. Any questions on this? I know you guys don't know different, but I got to tell you, they changed all this last July, the forms committee did, and it is so much easier to see now. Y'all don't know what we used to have. It was a headache. So you guys are coming in at a good time. This is good. There's that termination, breach, mediation. Again, any legally binding contract is going to have the provision about what happens if we breach, what happens if it terminates. So this addresses that. If anybody does or doesn't do what they promised to do. Surveillance, again, we looked at this last night in the listing agreement, that the seller can have video, they cannot have audio. We're going to talk to the buyers about this as well. I know what the listing agreement says about that. I'm very well aware of that. However, when I'm working with buyers, I have a conversation with them before we get to the property. And I say, the seller shouldn't have audio. But in the event they do, I need you to be careful what you say. I am not worried about my buyer walking in the front door and going, oh God, look at that carpet, whatever. That's their personal opinion. They're entitled to that. I don't care about that. What I don't want is my buyer walking in the front door and going, oh my God, this is the one, my dream home. I will do anything for this house. Write it up. If the seller's watching that or hearing that, what did they just hear? Cha-ching, 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 cha-ching. I have the conversation with my buyers. Let's keep those kind of thoughts and opinions to yourself until we get back out safely away from earshot distance. I'd like to say, think all sellers are honest and they're not going to do audio, but I'm not that naive. So I'm protecting my buyers. Also, make sure when you're going through the home with the buyers as a buyer's agent, that you respect the fact that it's still the seller's house. Make sure you keep people together. Make sure you don't let, y'all know there are videos of kids jumping up and down the bed. There are videos. Buyers just let the kids jump up and down on the bed. And there's videos of this. We got to make sure we're respecting the fact that we're in somebody else's home. If the seller asks you to take your shoes off before you come in, take your shoes off before you go in. It is their home. And make sure you're keeping everybody corralled together. Please don't open the front door and just let them go, crazy. We still need to make sure we're helping the seller protect their stuff. Even though it's your buyer, it's a respectable thing to do. I leave you this before we go to break. There was an actual disciplinary action last year. Agent went to the home. She got there early. She got there before her buyer. So she was going through and turning the lights on and getting the home ready until her buyer showed up. So she got the home set up and ready to go, waiting on her buyers. And she swung by the seller's bar and made herself a cocktail real quick. And the whole thing was caught on video. I don't have to make stuff up in this industry. That's the fun thing about it. You read the bulletin, you're going to learn a whole lot. Crazy stuff. Y'all be respectful of the fact that you're in somebody else's home. All right, I'll leave you with that. Let's take a break. We come back, we're going to wrap up this agency agreement. Those 10-minute breaks go by so fast, don't they? That's why I set the timer, not necessarily for you guys, but for me. Make sure time doesn't get away. All right, are we back? So we're gonna do our screenshot. Okay, so we talked about surveillance, photographs and videos. Unless the seller says otherwise, the buyer is allowed to take pictures, to take video of the home. Make sure we understand the difference in taking pictures of the home versus scoping the joint out and taking pictures of personal stuff, personal belongings, things that aren't going to convey. Sometimes, we're getting back to markets where we have, inventory, you have buyers out shopping, and you may have Saturday, for example, dedicated to take your buyer out and show them 13 homes in one day. Y'all, that's a big day. That's looking at a lot of homes. And after a while, all those homes are going to run together. And after a while, the buyer's going to say, now, is this kitchen with that home or was it right? So they may want to take pictures or notes or something to help keep themselves organized, to help keep those thoughts organized. They may want to take video if, again, they want to remember something. Again, we are with them to make sure that they're not taking pictures of things that aren't going to stay. Buyers should look in closets, look under kitchen cabinets, look in bathroom cabinets, right? The stuff, don't they have the right to see that space? See what that closet looks like? They should not be looking in dresser drawers and desk drawers, things that aren't going to stay. And that's another reason why we are there, is to make sure they're looking at what and only what they should be looking at. It's been my experience, a lot of buyers aren't comfortable opening closet doors. Hey, I get it. So we can help them out with that. I tell you one good thing about the pandemic that I wished would have stayed. During the pandemic, sellers were leaving doors and kitchen cabinet doors and drawers open for the showing because they didn't want people coming in and touching stuff. Remember, we were afraid to touch anything. So that went away when but part of me was like, I kind of like that, because then that kind of opened it up more. I'm not seeing it anymore, but it was a good idea in theory. It kind of helped buyers see. Again, they have a right to see what they're buying. We need to make sure that they're only looking at what they're buying, not looking for other things. Back to things being caught on video. Commission's had a big problem lately with catching buyers and agents on video going through medicine cabinets, looking for prescription medications and kitchen cabinets. Y'all know where people look for prescription medicines? Medicine cabinets and kitchen cabinets. So as a seller, why are you telling your sellers to leave it there? You know what I'm saying? Tell your sellers to put that stuff somewhere else during showings. Tell your sellers they might be looking in this cabinet, put stuff up. People never see.
One of the reasons why I think it's very important for the buyer to look, especially under the kitchen sink, is we were very interested in one home and it was completely rotted out. I would have had to really do a lot with that area.
Red flag, right? Absolutely. And you're right, Carrie, had you been shy, you may not have seen that. So yeah, buyers need to see this stuff. We need to get them to look and poke their heads in and stuff. Yep, absolutely.
So you can take videos, but you just can't go in like personal.
Yes. Yeah. And the buyers, and this may say this somewhere, but also, the buyers, they're not taking this video to like throw out there on Facebook, right? This is just for their personal notes, right? So let's keep this off of social media. Here's our wire fraud warning to buyers. We saw this to sellers last night. I think wire fraud is more common with buyers because they're the ones bringing money to the table. And when we get to our closing unit, we're going to learn that when buyers go to closing, when the money that they bring always needs to be readily available funds. They can't take a personal check to closing. So when it comes to the buyers bringing their money, they're really only doing a cashier's check or a wire transfer. And if they're choosing to do a wire transfer, we just need to caution them. Again, look them in the eyeball and tell them, I will never email you wire transfer instructions. Because if they get an email from you with wire transfer instructions, you need to let me know, because that means I've been hacked. And they also need to contact the attorney's number, pick up the phone and call them through a number that they obtained, not one that they got from the hacker's email. Pick up the phone and call the attorney and say, what is your wire transfer instructions? The agent should not be involved in that communication. That should happen directly from the buyer or the seller to the attorney. So it's just a warning. We're going to see your wire fraud warning again, probably next week when we look at the offer to purchase and contract. So we have several different opportunities to warn and try to protect them. I don't remember if I told you guys last night, but I went to a wire fraud seminar in like 2019, I think. And in 2019, they told us that billions, that's with a B, billions of dollars have been intercepted from the closing attorney's office for real estate closings. Big, big money out there. This has gotten really big, really fast. So be aware, do what you can to protect your buyers and their money. 2 places for the buyer to sign, print their name, signature, contact information. If you have more than 2 buyers, we have our additional signatures addendum. So we can add as many signatures as we need. If it's an entity buyer, if they're a corporation or LLC, we have their information there. And then we have the print the name of the real estate firm, the firm's license number and contact information. Signed by you, the individual agent. You can sign the buyer's agency agreement on behalf of the firm. And because you're signing it, you get to put your 6-digit license number with your contact information. And that is our exclusive buyer agency agreement with highlights. Questions? So I got a question for you guys. Private chat. Anybody ready? Tell me in a private chat. I will say this, hint, there may be more than one right answer. Everybody in? Okay. An agent must have a buyer agency agreement signed before I'm ready to present an offer on your behalf. And if I attempt your ability to work with other agents, I cannot demand exclusivity and an oral agreement. Please note, time of first substantial contact is when I have to do my disclosure. So there's an agency disclosure, working with real estate agency disclosure, and then there's the buyer agency agreement. The disclosure is not a contract, the agreement is. So we do our first substantial contact with our working with real estate agent disclosure. When we're getting our buyer agency agreement signed, it's either at the time I'm ready to present an offer on your behalf, or if I tell you, you can only work with me and no one else. Questions? So we've talked about working specifically with sellers. We've talked about working specifically with buyers. So the last little piece is when we get to work with both as a dual agent. And we've already talked about this, so this is just a super quick review. I think we can all agree that there is a definite possibility for a conflict of interest in a dual agency situation. Yes, we're serving two kings. I mean, we're expecting to provide the exact same services and duties to two parties. So there's a clear conflict of interest. In order to have dual agency, it needs to be intentionally created with informed written consent of both parties. Remember our football analogy. You're a coach. Once you get into dual agency, your role changes to a referee. You're still in the game, you're still involved, you're still a part of it. Did you forget to turn your camera on again? So dual agency, how many firms in dual agency? I want every single one of you show me. How many firms in dual agency? Just one firm. How many transactions in dual agency? Just one transaction, one property. How many clients? How many clients? Two. Y'all want a curveball because it's 8 o'clock on a Thursday night? In dual agency, how many customers? Customer. There it is. 0. I got 2 clients, 2 sides of the transaction. If they're both my client, then I don't have any customer. Ooh, I like that. That was something I just came up with off the top of my head. Again, the firm has this duty to represent both sides fairly. I can't offer advice. My advocacy goes away once we get into that dual agency relationship. Questions? That takes us up to the math. We're going to get started in the math tonight. We obviously won't get it done. I know some of you are more comfortable with math than others. So if you want to take what we learned tonight and work on the Unit 8 math this weekend, you're welcome to. If you want to wait next week until after we finish, that's fine too. But we're not going to get through it all tonight. So you guys, I always encourage you guys to kind of play around, pick up the calculator. You can't hurt the calculator. But definitely start considering getting this math into your study routine. Before we do that, for the 3rd time, making sure that we're good on the verbiage, because when you see math problems, it's going to refer to the selling agent and the listing agent. So we need to make really sure that we're good on our verbiage. Who represents who? or whom. Do you guys have your phones? Let's see. Good question comes in. I'm representing myself. I'm the seller and the listing agent. Another agent with a firm takes on the buyer. Would this be considered designated dual that the buyer would have to agree to? Again, you guys, designated doesn't happen automatically. First off, the firm has to have a policy saying whether or not they're going to do it. Not everybody offers designated. So please don't go into this assumption that everybody offers designated, okay? If it is an option, then designated would probably be best for me. Designated would definitely be best for the buyer, but you're right. The buyer would have to agree to do that. They go into this with full disclosure, knowing that they're buying an agent's home. Have you guys ever seen a home listed for sale and it says, you know, seller is agent or seller is related to agent? We're disclosing that we may have an interest. I may have some kind of involvement in the property. I think that's the best way to let the buyer know before they ever see it, what they might be getting into. But that comes back to that full disclosure. So yes, designated would be best for the buyer in that case, absolutely. But again, the firm has to offer it, and yes, the buyer has to agree to it. All right, if you guys have your phones, I want you to take a picture. Take a picture of this, because we're going to refer back to this, but I want you to have it in front of you. If you don't have your phone, just do a quick screenshot. We always have our phones on us, don't we? Though they don't go far. So what we're looking at, getting into the math, getting into your commission math. What we're looking in here is something called the commission map. This helps us see what happens to our commission. This helps us see. This is a guide, if you will. Some of you may find the commission map helpful. Some of you may not. If you like it, use it. If you don't, don't. It's pretty simple. When you see test question, when you get a commission problem, it's probably going to ask you, for example, about the listing agent's commission or maybe the selling firm's commission. So the map kind of helps you see, again, the breakdown of the commission and the trail or the path that it takes to get to the listing agent or the selling agent, whoever the problem's asking you. These commission problems are generally two, or let's say multi-step problems, which means you get to figure out several different calculations. Each tier of the map that you come down is a different calculation. I got several different T-bars for you guys as well. But when we're starting at the top with total commission or sales price, it's a calculation to divide it between the listing side and the selling side. And then it's a calculation to divide the side between the firm and the agent. So every time you come down a tier, we got to pick the calculator up. If you're working down the map, if you're starting at the top with commission and you're working down to, for example, the listing agent, the steps that you take to get there are to multiply. That's what that arrow on the left means. If you're working up the commission map, let's say, for example, they tell you what the listing agent made and they want to know what the sales price was. Now you're working up the map and the steps that you take there are to divide. Again, I got T-bars for you, but this gives us the visual. This gives us the roadmap of how that commission is going to look. You guys, please turn with me in your book to page 242. And 242 shows us a commission map in motion. So we start at the top there with our sales price of $189,000. This firm collects 6% commission. So we have 189%, or commission is a percentage of the sales price. Anybody remember what the word of means in a math problem? multiply, so a percentage of the sales price. So the sales price times the percent gives us total commission of $11,340. The listing firm has agreed to split their commission 50-50 with the selling firm. Not all commission splits are 50-50. Maybe it's 40-60, maybe it's 80-20. You're going to see some variations in your practice problems. We always do what the problem tells us. In this case, we're going to do a 50-50 split. So if we take the total commission, divide it by 2, we get the sides commission. Both sides are going to make $5,670. Everybody with me so far? Despite what the split is, this is a fantastic way, a fantastic place to stop and check yourself. Because no matter what the split is, 50-50, 60-40, 80-20, whatever it is, the selling side, dang it, where is it? Where's my plus? There it is. The selling side plus the listing side will always equal the total commission. So if you're not sure if you did your split right, the listing side plus the selling side will always equal the total commission. The side that we're focusing on page 242 is Holmes Realty. Now that Holmes Realty has been paid, now that the firm has been paid, they are going to share their commission with the agent. It is the firm's commission that they're sharing with the agent. In this case, Agent Ted has a 55% commission split. So now that we know how much Holmes Realty collected, $5,670, we're going to take that and split it again between the firm and the agent. We're going to see the firm's going to retain $2,551.50. Agent Ted is going to have his commission check for $3,118.50. Again, I like the map as a visual. If you need to draw it out, sometimes it helps me to see. It's got to go from, for example, if we know the total commission or we know the sales price, it's got to go from here to here to here, right? We can see the steps, we can map it out. And every tier, every time we hit a tier, we know we need to get a pick up a calculator. So there's your guide. Now let's talk about your formulas. Have I converted? Where are my T-bar fans? Some of you? That's all right. I'll get the rest of you. Don't worry. All right. So my T-bar fans, typically, the first thing we need to do is find the total commission. Now, guys, one thing you're going to start seeing when you see these commission problems is they're not necessarily typical. Commission math problems, the more you do, the better you're going to get at them, the better you're going to get at understanding them. Maybe we're given the total, maybe we're asked for the total commission. Maybe we need to determine the sides commission. They're all worded a little bit differently. And the best method I have for you guys to figure these out is to practice. The more of these you expose yourself to, the more you're going to be familiar with them and know what the problem is asking for. By the way, my non-T-bar fans, your formulas for this are on page 243. You can solve for commission, sales price, or commission rate. Do not worry about net to seller yet. We will see that next week. So the first tier of the commission map, we're probably going to either be looking for the total commission or the side commission. It just depends on how the problem's worded. Once we know the sides commission, then we're going to take that problem and split it again between the firm and the agent. So may that be the total commission divided by 2, if it's a 50-50 split to get the side. Again, this is just generally speaking helping us to get started. I've used the map and the T-bar to work out the solutions for the math problems that I have for you guys in the online learning system. So I've tried to give you both of those visuals as we work through those, or as you work through those problems. Again, the math concepts on 242 and 243, it's a different way to introduce you, a different way to help you see. Guys, please always remember, we don't read math, we do math. So when you're working through these math concepts, pick up the calculator, do the math in your own style. That's going to help it stick better. It's going to help it click. It does not mean anything to you if I say 80,000 times 6% is 80,000 times or 4,800. You guys with me? That means nothing. Pick the calculator up and see that 80,000 times 6% is $4,800 commission. Do it in your own style. Going to work a few of these together, talk through them together. If time allows tonight, I'll let Lou try a few. Again, we'll get through most of the commission tonight. Worry about net to seller next week. How's that sound? Let's just break this down. Commission first, and then we'll come in next week and talk about net to seller. Are we ready? We excited? This is y'all's commission. This is your money. Let's see how much we're going to get you paid. All right. First, we just read the problem. It says a home is listed for $230,000, sells for $227,000 with a 6% total commission being charged. Listing firm is cooperating with the firm who produces a buyer by offering them 2.5% of the sales price. Based on this information, what is the listing side commission of the sale? Read the problem. Always focus on the stem of the problem. The stem of the problem is what the problem's asking you. In this case, what's the problem asking me? I need to find how much the listing side is going to get paid. That's my focus. I have a home listed for $230,000 and it sells for $227,000. Do we base our commission off of the list price or the sales price? Our commission is based off of the sales price. So right off the bat, there's our distractor. Do y'all know the point of a distractor? To distract you. So by knowing the formulas, by knowing what the numbers that we're looking for, if you don't know the formula, remember, all formulas go on a flashcard or a piece of paper in your notebook that says formulas. Somehow we got to know these formulas. Because if you don't know the formula, you don't know how to work it. If you don't know the formula, you're trying to do something with that $230,000. You have allowed the distractor to win. So we know the formula, and you guys did great. We all know that we're focusing on the sales price. So if we map this out, I have a sales price of $227,000. I have a 6% commission. This commission, this is going to be split between the sides. So we got the listing side and the selling side. Everybody with me? All I've done so far is taken the information from the problem and mapped it out. I gave myself a visual. The listing firm is cooperating with the firm that produces a buyer by offering them 2.5%. So that means the selling firm is getting 2.5%. If the selling firm is getting 2.5%, why don't you guys share with me in a chat, private chat, how much the listing firm, not the amount, but the percent. If the selling firm's getting 2.5%, what percentage is the listing firm gonna get? Look at you guys. So the total commission, I thought it was too late to do math. Look at you guys go. If the total commission is 6% and they're giving away 2.5%, should be a minus there. That means what's left for the listing firm, what they have left to collect is 3.5%. I'm collecting 6%. The seller pays the listing firm. The listing firm shares their commission with whomever's bringing the buyer. I'm collecting 6% total. I'm giving you, the selling firm, 2.5%. So how much do I get to keep for myself? 3.5. What's 3.5 plus 2.5? 6. Yeah, they're cooperating with the firm who produces a buyer by offering them 2.5. These commission math problems is where they really start. You got to pay attention. Absolutely. So now that we know the listing split, we can bust out a T-bar. I know the rate or percent always goes where? Julie says it always goes in the bottom right. Can you guys see that? Is that too low? Can you see that okay? Yeah, okay. Rate or percent always goes in the bottom right. I know my sales price is $227,000. Up, down line and the T-bar means multiply. Also, because I'm working down the commission map, working down tells me to multiply. So however you want to see that, or your formula on page 243. I'm running out of room here. So now on your calculator, we take 227,000 times 3.5%. How much is the listing firm going to get? $7,945. I really want to put that somewhere else where we can see it. Here, let's put that over there. That's how much the listing firm is going to collect. We mapped it out. We got the visual. And just start filling in the blanks. If one side's getting 2.5, the other side will get 3.5. Do you have any questions on this? For fun, why don't you guys tell me in the chat how much the selling firm's going to get? Doesn't that sound like fun? You guys are on point tonight. Still based off of the same sales price, 227,000. Selling firm is going to collect 2.5%. So their side's going to be $5,675. I know that's not what the question is, but most questions are going to take it a step further. That's what we're going to look at next. Questions on this one, though. We just had to figure out the side this time. Okay. Well, I'm telling you, you guys are on point tonight. So you know what? Why don't y'all tell me the answer to this one? Tell me about Elizabeth. Private chat. Be like one more minute and then we'll talk about it. While you guys are finishing up, hang on, I need to, I'm just gonna get out of this for a second. I'm gonna keep it here where you can see it. But I need to give myself some space to write. Should have pulled my whiteboard up earlier. My whiteboard, i.e. Word document. Oops. Oh dear. There you go. Okay. So Elizabeth lists a property for sale, and her firm has a written policy of charging 7% on all transactions. Listing firm has agreed that they will cooperate with the firm that brings the buyer by offering them 3% of the total sales price. Elizabeth's commission split is 70%. Based on this information, how much commission will Elizabeth earn if the property sells for $285,000? Who's the only person I care about in this problem? Who's the only thing I care about? Elizabeth. She's all I care about, right? I'm just caring about paying Elizabeth. Elizabeth is who? Elizabeth is the listing agent, right? That's all I care about. So when I map this one out, I know that the sales price is $285,000. I know there's a total of 7% commission. I'm going to take that and divvy it between the list side and the sales side. So we'll call this the list side. This is the selling side. Then once we figure out the list side, don't we need to take that and split it out again? Now between the firm and the one person we care about is Elizabeth. Getting Elizabeth paid is all I care about. I think another thing that the map can do will help you eliminate distractions. I promise you, as you guys get into these and doing these, it's going to babble on and on about the selling agent, how much the selling agent's going to get paid, and da 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 da. It's going to give you all that information. Guess what? I don't care about the selling agent. All I care about is who? Elizabeth. Stay focused on the stem of the problem. Stay focused on what the problem's asking you. I'm telling you guys, these commission math are where they really like to use distractions. So just stay focused on who we care about. So let's get Elizabeth paid. Total commission is 7%. The listing firm has agreed that they will cooperate with the firm that brings the buyer by offering them 3%. Well, that's nice. If the selling side is going to get 3%, how much is the listing side going to get? You can show me. How much are they going to get? 4. Doesn't 4 plus 3 equal 7? So to find the side, the only reason I care about the selling side is because it helps me figure out the listing side, right? Now that I know the listing side, the selling side is dead to me. That's all I needed them for. Any questions on how I got the 4%? So now we need to figure out how much the listing side gets. I know my total commission. I know I'm working down the map. so I can multiply, but I also know that I can use a T-bar, 4%. And what we're solving for is the list side commission. Up, down line on the T-bar means multiply. So on our calculators, we're going to say 285,000 times 4%. And I'm going to get a listing side commission of $11,400. This is how much the side is going to collect. Is that not right? I'm getting some confused. Do I have questions? Did I do something? Times 4%. Yeah. What questions do I have? We did one tier. We figured how much the side's going to get. Now we need to take the side and split it down further. We figured out how much the firm's going to collect. Now we need to share that with Elizabeth. Of the firm's side, Elizabeth is going to get 70%. The firm will retain 30. Don't need to know that, but sometimes it helps to see that 30% plus 70% equals the side commission. So we know Elizabeth's getting 70% of the side. Pick up my calculator again, which means if you want, we can use another T-bar. Now we're looking at the total commission. I'm sorry, the firm's, the side's commission. Rate or percent always goes in the bottom right. Elizabeth's commission's on top. On our calculator, we say 11,400 times 70%. And this has us paying Elizabeth $7,980. Not a bad day at the office, is it? What they don't tell you is what everything Elizabeth had to do to sell us. It was more than a day. Questions? Perfect. Thank you. If you didn't get it right, and you don't have to answer this, if you didn't get it right, do you see where you went wrong? And I see head shaking yes, and that's what it's about, and that's what practice does. This is why I want you guys to work the kinks out, make these mistakes now. You guys have choices. Work the kinks out, make the mistakes now, or wait and work the kinks out on test day. Entirely up to you. Guys, we still got a little bit more to talk about. There's something that you're going to encounter in your homework for the commission math called graduated commission. We will talk about that on, I guess, Tuesday when we come back together. So Tuesday, we're going to finish our commission math in Unit 8. We're also going to do seller net. So I do got a little bit more math. So we got to start with math on Tuesday. Bring your calculators. We'll Kahoot next week. We get to do an agency Kahoot, wrapping up agency next week. How do we feel about that? Whew. And then we get to jump into contracts. So once we finish Unit 8, we're going to get into Unit 9. We'll get through that pretty quickly. It's short, sweet, and to the point. And then we'll get into Unit 10 next week. Unit 10 is our North Carolina contract law, where we're going to look specifically at our offer to purchase and contract. Please look ahead. Please review where we've been. Look ahead to where we're going. Please also remember, I'm here to help you guys. Never hesitate to reach out to me. Y'all, I'm not a mind reader. I don't know what you may need help with until you let me know. So let me know how I can help. Reach out to me. Practice the math. Look at the material. Next week is February, isn't it? Did y'all know that? Yeah, I just think I realized that today. So January is just about behind us, which means February, and then the test is in March. So stay with me. Okay. Okay. Y'all have a great weekend. I will see you guys on Tuesday.
And then I just need to ask a question, please.
Sure, of course.
And this is on the test unit 7 quiz,
Okay.
but I'm looking really quick here.